Wonderful. Well, listen, we want to take some time to welcome all of our viewers from across Canada. Thank you for joining us by Facebook live stream. Hello out there. That's you. Hello, hello. You know, Sheldon Neal, host, producer. Molly?
I'm Molly. I'm a host correspondent on the show. So it's not just you guys in here.
That's right.
There's also people watching outside. Just to tell you guys a little bit what's happening this evening, we have Marcel O'Gorman who's with us. We're super excited to hear him talk. Lorna Dueck's going to be spearheading that interview today. And of course, we get to talk about what we love to do. And we really believe that faith and media are interspersed. We believe the headlines do speak to the God that we serve, and we're really excited to share with you about what God's been doing in our season.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable David Onley.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, Molly. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a pleasure it is to be here this evening. I just wanted to take this moment or two to say that I so appreciate what Lorna has done to bring Context into being, and now in its 7th year, a remarkable success story, if for no other reason than it is filling a need that simply hadn't been filled for years in Canadian media. I think one of the biggest concerns I had when I was in the business, in the news business, was the decreasing amount of content in the news, and along with the decreased level of content, it's one of the reasons people have been turning increasingly to the internet to get information, because they're not getting it in television. The one big exception being, of course, Context. That is in the sense of Context with Lorna Dueck. And that's one of the great things that you've provided over the years, Lorna, and I think that's why so many people are so proud to be with you and support you in this, this whole endeavor. I've seen it, if you will, as I mentioned, from the TV side of things, also from the political side of things, the faith side, and trust me, and I believe you'd agree with me when I say Canada needs Context with Lorna Dueck more than ever before.
Context is only made possible because of viewers like you. Please give to our program and help us keep finding God in the news headlines. Call to give at 1-800-265-3100 or donate online at contextwithlorna.com.
Here with Lorna Dueck is tonight's featured guest, friends, Marcel O'Gorman.
Marcel, this is your phrase that you coined, digital sin, and you wanted us to have a reckoning with it. And when I saw your concept of this, I said, okay, we need to learn with you. You actually are trying to teach us that that humans are essentially technological. What do you mean?
The idea is, a lot of philosophers agree, and anthropologists, that humans are technical animals. That what we've done is we've created civilizations by externalizing ourselves in various ways. Marshall McLuhan talked about this, if you're familiar with Marshall McLuhan, about the extensions of man, he called it, but it goes deeper than that. We've co-evolved with technology, so humans are excellent at exteriorizing themselves in various ways, from using early stone tools to the internet, basically, where some people say exteriorize our consciousness, or we can actually, live on the internet, travel on the internet. So exteriorization is something we do extremely well. It's what humans do as a species.
So we're going to change now. People have changed because we've externalized all these new devices that, okay, you also are challenging us in your work around care, attention, around memory. You even are challenging us on digital dementia.
The term comes from a German neuroscientist named Manfred Spitzer. And his theory, he's a top neuroscientist, his theory is that by giving, it has to do with small children and child development, by giving kids opportunities to interact with media. So he says the worst thing you can give a kid is a flat, shiny screen that they go like this on, because that's not really making parts of their brain fire that they need to have fire to develop a healthy brain. Then at every stage of development, we're giving them different digital options that have them opt out of other brain-healthy activities. So video games, social media, cell phones. Later on, it could be even for adults later on. But for kids, if they're not developing those parts of their brain, his theory is we're setting them up for early onset dementia later in life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to dig into this concept of digital sin. And I recently saw a digital sin. Take a listen to this, and then I want you to comment on it.
Yeah. In this populist age that we live in, it's not difficult for demagogues to push buttons and to use racial or religious or ethnic identity and conflict as a basis for saying, well, we don't want those people here, we don't want these people here. And there's a huge issue around hate speech in Myanmar, which actually Mr. Zuckerberg admitted on Facebook, saying Facebook has been used as a platform for hate in Myanmar, and he says he's going to do something about it. We'll see if he does. He should.
How did Facebook drive people out of their country and start a hate campaign?
Okay.
And can Mr. Zuckerberg do anything about it?
Well, I think what's really interesting about this is in Myanmar, people look to Facebook as they just got the internet. In 2014, I think there was 1% of people in Myanmar had the internet. By 2016, there were tens of thousands of people. Their main outlet for news, Facebook. So if you're looking at Facebook for your main news outlet, guess what you're getting? You're getting news that's fabricated by whoever wants to propagate that on their own networks, but also whoever wants to buy the ads to put on the network. So if that's your news outlet, you're very vulnerable and you've got a problem. And this is always about vulnerability. It's always about taking advantage of vulnerable situations. Now, can you blame Mark Zuckerberg for this? That's the big question.
I just don't understand how 700,000 people can get displaced by fake, it must have been hate-mongering news.
Yeah, I mean, it's a snowball effect where you essentially, you put these kinds of fake news out there, and then it just happens, one incident at a time, community at a time, and then it snowballs or mushrooms, however you want to call it. I don't think you could say that the 700,000 is because of Facebook, but certainly Facebook was a catalyst for a lot of that. Zuckerberg's admitted to it. And the question is, how did that happen? What do we do now? The same goes for any time we introduce a new technology anywhere. You may have heard of the War of the Worlds on radio, fooling people into believing that there's a Martian attack because people weren't aware that, that they could be manipulated by the radio. Imagine that. So we have to be aware that anytime we introduce new technologies into culture, there are going to be unintended consequences, and the people who are in charge of those technologies, they have to be aware of that.
This introduces this concept of the attention economy. Yeah. It is something new that has been introduced. Describe what the attention economy is.
This is where things get tricky and you can really start pointing fingers. We used to talk about industrial economy or a capitalist economy, a knowledge economy. Attention economy is something different. When you start seeing a Super Bowl ad for 30 seconds worth $5 million, what are you buying there? You're buying people's attention. You're buying eyeballs. So we say, people say, well, Facebook's free. Why do you complain? Facebook's free. You shouldn't complain. It's not free. You're paying attention is what you're paying. You're paying your own cognitive time is what you're paying. And that's a very valuable thing. And where it gets tricky, why I said you could point fingers, is because of things like captology, the science of combining technology with really rhetoric, the art of persuasion, and boiling that down into little things like notification alerts on your phone, like timing the kinds of alerts that you get on your phone so that you're constantly on call and waiting for that next little hit to come. Those are actually strategic design methods that are created through the science of captology to capture your attention.
We've got a great picture of you doing confessions, digital confessions in your gear, and you go to classrooms and you do this. You lock up phones on people.
I hope no one's experiencing nomophobia. Cognitive scientists are using this no more phone, nomophobia. They're actually using that term. It's kind of funny.
Nomophobia.
Nomophobia, the fear of being separated from your phone. There is some great research on this. People experience anxiety. People have trouble completing tasks in scientific experiments to complete tasks on a computer when they're detached from their phone.
Oh, Sheldon's just all the time.
So that's really, and I do research with the Vision and Attention Lab at the University of Waterloo. So we lock away students' phones in large classroom settings with the Yonder cases that we have here tonight. And we're studying whether it's having an impact on the students' mind wandering. So there's Professor Dan Smilek I work with, that's his specialty, mind wandering. It's a great specialty. So we're doing that research. Now, the digital sin aspect of this is totally related because what I'm trying to do is to create what I call digital rituals. And I'm drawing on religion, actually, which has fantastic rituals, and rituals for very important reasons. The rituals are powerful, but rituals have been liquidated out of our lives. The secularization of culture has taken ritual out. And while it's replaced other kinds of rituals, religious rituals, with these digital rituals like checking your phone, sleeping with your phone under your pillow, handing your kid a phone whenever your kid cries, swiping your phone a certain way or tapping a certain, we get attached to these rituals, and they're very powerful. And software designers know this. Interfaces actually provoke ritualistic behaviors.
Okay, because you scientists are moving in on our complacency about our phones. I want to play another clip from an earlier Context episode. We had Dr. Daniel Amen on. He's kind of a controversial neurologist, but he's very populist. And he said social media addiction is harmful to the brains of children. Listen to this, and I want you to comment on this.
The more a child or teenager spends time on social media, the more depressed they are, the more overweight they are, the more socially isolated they are. This has not been a good trend for the mental health of our youth. Now with 20% of girls, I mean, it's really crazy when you think about it, 20% of girls meet the criteria for major depression. So that is really a very serious issue.
So Marcel, do you agree with Dr. Amen that our social media habits are hurting our brains, children's brains?
Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. So there are other cultural factors that are tied up with tech that are causing these problems. There's really interesting research out of the London School of Economics. They looked at schools that had actually banned devices in the classroom, and they studied them for a pretty good period, 4 schools in the UK. And what they found that the kids who were most at risk, so the kids who came from disadvantaged backgrounds or who maybe were new citizens or who had learning disabilities, those kids benefited the most from having their devices taken away. And that tells you something. It tells you that there is something more complex happening here, that kids are using devices, for example, to escape. If they already have a difficult family situation or difficulties in school, the phone just exacerbates that and makes it worse. The kids who are fairly well off and fairly privileged seem to be able to navigate the situation much better off. That's what our research has shown so far at the University of Waterloo. It's like university students seem to have less trouble with devices in the classroom. They can manage, the temptation to be on their device because they're fairly well-off kids. Most of them come from decent backgrounds. I mean, by decent, I mean well-off. They're not marginalized groups, most of them. So it's a very complicated situation. I don't use the word addiction. I use the word dependence. I think dependence is definitely possible.
We hear stories that Instagram is sending, I don't know if it's bots or who's sending these things out, but requests for girls, nude photos. Is there the dark side that real?
We're putting devices into the hands of kids who are, well, they're full of desires and they're experimenting, and we're giving them this thing at a time in their life when they're trying to get away from parents. Naturally, they're trying to detach a little bit, and that's okay. They're supposed to. But we give them this thing that puts that into hyperdrive. It's like they have their own worlds now. They have access to everything. They create their own social networks, and they're always on, 24/7 with their friends. And things are going to happen. Impulses are going to take over, and it's also going to expose them to things that they otherwise would not be exposed to. Kids used to come home from school or from their friend's house in the evening, and they're at home, and they're with their parents. There might be a phone call, but there's an internal domestic surveillance system, right? The mom answers the phone, oh, hi, Billy, you want to talk to Susie? Here you go. That doesn't happen anymore. So dark things are going to happen, and those things are out there. They're definitely out there.
Are the social media giants out of control?
The question, I think, is, are the giants out of control, or is what they've created out of control? That's what we're seeing with Mark Zuckerberg and Myanmar. It's like, he's sitting back saying, oh, shoot, I can't believe I created this thing, this massive thing. So they have a lot of power, a tremendous amount of power, and how they wield that should be looked at very carefully. So they've created this thing that's out of control and can get out of control. Should they be responsible for it? Yeah, to a certain extent, I think, especially if you're making billions of dollars with this thing, you're just kind of unleashing it. You should take stock and actually take responsibility for some of the impacts of that. You know, refugees from Myanmar could use some kind of housing, clean water, assistance. Facebook could do a lot to assist.
Wow. When you encounter a community like this, people who want to be movers and shakers, enough about media, a project like ours, what do you think?
I think it's great. I mean, that's the other side of social media, right? All technology. There's this French philosopher, Bernard Stiegler, talks about technology as a pharmacon. You have to take the right dose, right? It can cure or it can kill. So if you're using media, I mean, you could use media to propagate bad, just as you can use it to propagate good. And we have to keep that in mind. So it's not all about, you know, I've used the word digital abstinence before. It's not about all or nothing. We have to get rid of technology. It's about, no, we have to actually create an ethos in people, not about even ethics, a value system, an ethos that people can actually share, that they can be proud of, that other people can look to and say, oh, that's right. That's what we have to do. That's how we should be using technology. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
All right. Professor Marcel O'Gorman, everybody, thank him very much. Thank you, Professor.
Context is only made possible because of viewers like you. Please give to our program and help us keep finding God in the news headlines. Call to give at 1-800-265-3100 or donate online at contextwithlorna.com.
I am blessed to share media stories that reveal God's love for the world. Our world is hurting and looking for answers. And I can't think of a more crucial time, friends, than this in our history to share the answer: Jesus Christ. That's the power of working in faith-filled media. Two stories, however, in particular, that stand out for me were Las Vegas. I traveled to Las Vegas days after the tragic massacre there. It was the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. modern history. And uncovering the story of a particular survivor who claimed to be protected, get this, by an angel while bullets flew overhead. This story, not covered anywhere else in Canadian media, carried with it a particular weight of responsibility. And a show we did here in Toronto when a mad man mowed down 10 innocent people with a rental van. I was there just hours after it happened, and we were able to not only bring viewers to directly the doorstep of the tragedy, but also go a little bit deeper and offer an idea, a perspective, an image of hope through what happened there. Let's take a look.
As I was praying, a gentleman came in front of me, and he had on white. He was real tall, and I couldn't tell you what he looked like. And he had on all white, and he said to me as I'm standing there crying, was just praying and crying, and he said, shh, God's got you. You are protected. And as he said that, I stopped crying. And I looked up, and when I looked up, this pathway had been cleared. It just opened up. And I saw that, and I was like, oh, God's, you know, he spread the Red Sea, you know, he opened it up. I said, he opened this up. And when that happened, I told the people that were behind me, get out, get out.
How does God become real in times when faced with tragedy?
Well, I know. I mean, that's so difficult to think through and process, especially people that maybe are not aware of what the Bible is saying. But for me, just to go back to knowing your Bible as truth, as the Word of God, anchors my reality and anchors, I believe, our church, and to know that we're in a fallen world. This is not a perfect world. And the answer is not that God is ignoring us or that God just wound this clock up and is letting it go. No, the answer is God loves us and He gave us the opportunity to be in relationship with Him through His Son, Jesus Christ, and that there's hope in that.
I want to thank everybody that has supported Context and has really enabled us to step into our God-given gifts. And I will say that the Lord has placed me in a very unique position. I never knew I would be here, where I sit in the Christian media world and I also sit in the mainstream media world. One example I'll give you, I was out in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, of course, covering that horrific bus crash where 16 people lost their lives. I'm a Saskatchewan girl. That's home for me. That was one of the most difficult stories I've ever had to cover in my life. The coach of that team died in that crash, and he was a believer. And if you guys watch that memorial across the country, I've never seen Jesus' name so proclaimed on national networks across Canada. And so when I found out they were believers, you know, everyone's trying to talk to his wife, who is like away from all the cameras, will not speak to anybody. And I just wrote her a message, and I remember just saying, Christina, this is the hardest thing for me to write, but if you want to have a conversation, I can have a conversation with you about your husband's life that no one else will have. And that morning, she said, meet me at his office. I've been around this arena. Every person I talk to speaks about your husband. Darcy this, Darcy that, just so many beautiful things. Known as a coach, an incredible player. Of course, a father. But he was your husband. Who was this man?
Well, you think he'd be easy to describe because he had so many good qualities, but I think that actually makes it harder. He had kind eyes when you look at him, and that kind of was his eyes. If you could see his eyes, they were his soul. Like, you could see how kind he was.
Him in a nutshell, this he made up.
You know, there was so much more to him outside the hockey world. He was the man that every night when he came home, he would do devotions with his kids before he would go to bed. You know, didn't matter if he just had the worst loss ever and his team played awful. Darcy Lisa always bugged me because he bought me so many things. Like pretty much everything you will ever see me wear, he has bought me. So I was just joking with my mom. I said, I know why he bought me so many presents now, because he had to buy them all in the first half.
To all of you who are donors and friends and prayer partners for this work, I just can't thank you enough. And I'm just so grateful to be on this journey in ending season 7 for Context. And it's quite a ride. I remember very clearly being a young mother with a brand new baby and a little 2-year-old, and I was sitting on the floor in the kitchen reading the newspaper going, there is nothing of God in here, and starting to wonder if my background as a reporter should do something about God in the news. And I had a prayer that day on the floor in the kitchen. Lord, let me impact the media for you. God heard that prayer, and I ask you to pray for me because I've got a great ride and an amazing team, and it's a beautiful opportunity that we have. So why would we back down now? Why would we quit just because we've got a new challenge in front of us called digital sin? Let's get on it. Okay, so for me, this is what digital sin is. Digital sin is behavior that is unleashed into your activity, into your own behavior through technology. It's just something that's happening in your life, and you're enabling it through technology, or it's happening to you, or it's happening in Myanmar, or wherever because of technology. And our niche in Context is to help you educate about where might God show up in something that is just a reality going on in the world. So we take normal news things, we take normal stuff going on, and we ask, well, how might that intersect with the love of God on my life? Every week, we have a chance to do amazing work. We have seen, and we've heard stories of families we know and love. And I use technology a ton in my family. And in my personal life, it helps me in my spiritual life. And we've all heard about different ways we use it. Well, families now are staying home and making waffles on Sunday morning and watching church online. I don't know what that's going to do to religious education. I don't know what that's going to do to community life, but these are not neutral things that are unfolding. And it's our job to jump into the fact that media is not like it was when this organization started 50 years ago. And we step into an amazing legacy. There were very few opportunities for people to come in, and the founder of this organization, he was a street evangelist who, when he knocked on doors, he saw people sitting in front of screens and decided the way in was through the antenna on their roof. Now, 50 years later, we do have tech giants like Mark Zuckerberg who said, we're just interested in connecting people. He and his team of geniuses in all the different tech fields have actually hired an army of neurologists. I'm not talking one or two at each of these places, but there's an army of neurologists who purposely engineered their devices, their technology, so it would be addictive to our brains. And we have been manipulated to live in a flood of information. We were shocked to discover that it can change democracy, right? Who knew Russia might be dripping things into your Facebook? But if this is the world that we're living in, for us to just say, I'm not going to go front line on that, really questions how God has designed the human race to be responding. So for me not to think of the patterns that digital activity is putting into my life, for me, that is digital sin. You know, the Bible warns us that it takes just one generation to lose belief in God. Now, I use an app on my phone to read through the Bible in a year. It's a wonderful habit that I learned from my mentor, David Maines. And I have noticed and I regularly have to change it up because I notice if I just use the app for reading through the Bible, I don't learn as well as when I read through a thin onion skin page. However, what you do learn when you read through the Bible in a year is that long trudge through the Old Testament. And the journey from Exodus to Samuel is filled with pause, where God reminds us, it takes just a generation to lose this. It takes just a generation to lose this. And at one point, God gives a technology lesson in Joshua. And he says, make a pile of stones. That was technology then, stones. And your kids will ask, what are these stones? And you're supposed to use them as a trigger to tell you this is how God took care of us. There was water here. We were frightened from an enemy. God made this water part, and read about it in Joshua 4. But all through scriptures, God reminds us, I'm going to use the human race to communicate to others about God. So why would we abandon media? When God has ushered a community of us into a 50-year legacy, and we could go week after week and we could tell you stories, where Context's job is to talk about the world around us. And that's what our job is to be doing, is to tell you the most important stories that the devil is trying to get a grip on in this world and to shape them into goodness, into love, into hope, into community. And we want to start season 8 with our mandate of being boundary-breaking media that reveals Christ. Non-Christian people, non-religious people do not expect the faith world to show up in the stories where we're going. We attract people who aren't interested in going to church. That is our job. We attract people on set as guests, newsmakers, news shapers. They don't expect to be asked by a Christian broadcaster to come and explain what's going on in their world or the challenge they're facing. And Christians often do not expect us to show up where we do show up, and sometimes they're offended that we are there and that we're giving voice to the breadth and the diversity of the voices we do. But that is what Context does. But nothing happens without your partnership in joining this team in support prayerfully and financially.
Context is only made possible because of viewers like you. Please give to our program and help us keep finding God in the news headlines. Call to give at 1-800-265-3100. or donate online at contextwithlorna.com.